inverse trig functions are what we're going to be talking about here, and there's only three that you need to be aware of. Okay, and those three are the inverse sine, inverse cosine, and inverse tangent. Right now, as far as how these inverse trig ratios will be represented, right, each of these inverse functions can be represented one of two ways. Either in terms of a negative power between the trig ratio and a variable. So this, if you see something written like this, it represents inverse sine of x, inverse cosine of x, and inverse tangent of x. Notice this is different than had the power of -1 were outside the x, or to the outside or to the right of x. If it were to the right of x, it would represent the exponential property of being the reciprocal. It would look more like the sine of x to the power of -1 is equivalent to 1 over sine of x. But this is not. This is something completely separate. It may also be designated as arc sine of x, or arc cosine of x, or arc tan of x. Those all mean the same thing. Okay? The arc tan, arc sine, arc cosine simply mean the inverse trig functions for those. And what this means, these represent where here this value of x is the ratio of whatever the unknown angle is. Okay, so in this, the values of x here represent a ratio. Okay, so for the arc cosine, that x value is the cosine ratio of whatever the unknown angle is. So these inverse trig functions allow you to find unknown angles. Okay, so in looking at this, if you were to calculate one of these, so if we took the inverse sine of 0.5, what this represents in terms of words is this represents what angle has a sine ratio of 0.5. And so that's how these inverse trig ratios are set up, or what they represent. So anytime you see this written, it's actually representing an angle measure. You do need to identify whether you're finding these angles in radians or degrees. It will specify, or it'll ask you to find both. And so if you're doing this, if you're trying to calculate what angle has a sine ratio of 0.5, and the way that you would enter this is you would first make sure you're in the mode that you want to be in. So here I'm in degree mode. So let's find it in degrees. Okay, I take the inverse sine, which is green diamond y, of 0.5, close off my parentheses and hit enter, and I get my answer 30 degrees. And so this would be this theta value. The angle whose sine ratio is 0.5 is 30 degrees. Now, if I wanted to find that in terms of radians, I would have to change my mode. So I could click the mode button, scroll down, change it into radian mode. Do the same thing. I don't have to change how I enter it. And it would give me my value here. I'm going to put it in, I'm going to put the ratio of 1/2 just so I get my answer in the exact form. But I get pi over 6, and that should make sense because pi over 6 radians is equivalent to 30 degrees. Okay, so anytime you see this inverse trig function, it's representing an unknown angle. And what you plug into the part inside is a ratio. And so let's say I wanted to find the following. If I wanted to evaluate what is the inverse cosine of 3/5. Okay. What this is asking is what angle has a cosine ratio of 3/5. Okay. So using your calculator, we can just plug it in. So we take the inverse cosine, so green diamond z, 3/5. Close it off. Again, I'm in radian modes. I'm going to go ahead and get my answer in decimal form here. So I'm going to put a green diamond, hit the green diamond button. And when I hit enter, I get my answer. Again, remember this represents an angle measure. Theta is equal to 0.927. And this would be radians. If I wanted to find the degree mode value of this, change my mode. Do the same calculation, put it in decimal form. And so the equivalent angle is 53.13 degrees if you were finding it in the degree form. All right, so try your own right here. See if you can find the arctan. Okay, so it's meaning the same thing, right? What angle has a tangent of, and we'll just put a decimal, 1.5. They find it in both degrees and radians for me. All right, so again, if you see the expression arctan 1.5, again, you need to understand how to interpret it. It means what angle has a tangent ratio of 1.5, and you can calculate it with the TI-89. Just hit green diamond T for arctan, okay, or inverse tan. Type in 1.5. Now I'm in degree mode right now, so this will give me degrees first. So 56.3 approximately in degrees. And if I wanted to find the radian mode or the radian form of that answer, again, I can enter the same thing, arctan or inverse tan of 1.5, hit enter, and I get 0.983 approximately radians. All right, is everybody able to do the calculation? Okay. Again, hopefully as we go through today, I want you to be able to understand what it means, because I still would guess that many of you may not understand what it means or what the wording or pieces mean. But I want to make sure that you understand, if you see it in a form, how you can use your calculators to at least get the numbers that we're looking for. Eric?
I put it on the calculator. Actually, it looked fine.
What did you put?
Oh.
Yeah, use arctan. So the whole thing is, now think about what this means. So we talked a little bit about it in the unit circle. Okay, what's the biggest x value you can possibly have in the unit circle? What's the highest value for x? 1. Okay, so here, this is the highest x value. What's the lowest x value? -1. So what that means is the value that has to go inside the arc sine and arc cosine, or in this case arc cosine, has to fall between -1 and 1. Anything that falls outside of that realm is going to be undefined. So if you tried to take the inverse cosine of -3, does -3 fall within that range, that limit? No. So if we were to calculate that, the green diamond y, or green diamond z for inverse cosine of -3, hit enter, it'll be undefined. It's not a real number. And that should be consistent. We need to have a value between -1 and 1 inside the parentheses on these inverse cosine. What about inverse sine? What's the highest sine on the unit circle? 1. The lowest sine is, the lowest y value is -1. So your sine values also have to fall between -1 and 1. If you were to take, so again, this would be undefined. If you were to try the inverse sine of some number, again, that was either less than -1 or greater than 1, so even 1.1, it's going to be undefined as well. It has to fall between -1 and 1.